Well, hello and welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. I am David O'Leary, and on behalf of the Aero Club of New England, we are pleased that you could join us this evening for our annual Crash Course Safety Seminar. This is our first ever virtual crash course, and so I would like to offer a special welcome to everybody who's joining us from outside of New England for tonight's event. It is really, really good to have you with us, and great to be able to share a bit about the Aero Club of New England, America's first general aviation organization. The Aero Club of New England focuses on aviation safety with seminars just like the one that you're participating in tonight. We award a number of scholarships throughout the year for aviation technical training and flight training. And we also do a great deal of sharing the social aspect of aviation with those who just love flight. Our membership is made up of active pilots, of former pilots, and of non-pilots, people who just love to learn about aviation. We love flying and airplanes, and we love talking about flying and airplanes. So if that is you, you're among friends, we welcome you, and we hope that you'll consider joining us. We're currently offering a new virtual membership for just $25. There'll be a link in the chat, or you can go to acon.org to find out just a little bit more. We have a really, really compelling and entertaining and informative evening ahead. We're recording, by the way, tonight's event. You should know that. We will feature remarks from our New England FAA Regional Administrator, Colleen D'Alessandro, who will join us, along with a rundown of regional accidents and incidents from Stephen K. Brown, who joins us from the FAA FAAST team. And finally, a deep dive into a specific event with Richard McSpadden, who joins us from the AOPA Air Safety Institute. I want to begin by taking just a moment to introduce my co-chair, our co-chair for the evening's event. Joining us from London, England, where he makes his home, ACON Board Advisor Paul Diat. I also don't miss an opportunity to thank Paul and acknowledge his immense contributions to the Aero Club of New England, as well as to tonight's event, Crash Course, which Paul has chaired for over 20 years. So good evening, Paul, or almost good morning, I guess, where you are soon enough. And thanks for all you do for ACON and for aviation safety.
Well, Dave, thanks for the introduction, and everyone in the audience, we're glad you're here, and we look forward to having you in a hybrid event next year, in person, with our typical large audience size, and also online as well. The participation tonight will earn you Wings credit. This assumes that you registered for the event with your Wings email address. If you did not, then use whatever email address you did register with and send us an email at crashcourse@acon.org to tell us what email address you did use to register, and we'll synchronize those two so that you do get Wings credit. To get the credit, you have to stick around through the Q&A session at the end of Richard McSpadden's presentation. Now, we don't make an event like this happen all alone. For the past 31 years, we've had generous support from a large number of sponsors. And as you can see, here's a list of those companies that have been with us year after year after year, and some decade after decade. A special shout out to David Clark, who was our first sponsor ever. We thank them for their continued support of this specific event. We also want to thank all the volunteers over the years that have made this possible. That image on the far left is me presenting 20 years ago, the accident reviews, but we've had dozens of speakers and many, many, many people from within the Aero Club and outside of the Aero Club, and a lot of help from AOPA and the Air Safety Institute and NTSB and others to make this event substantive for people. And a special shout out to Dr. Gary Kearney, who brought this methodology from the medical discipline into aviation, and it's the methodology that we use now to support this initiative. And now I'll give the program back to David.
Thank you, Paul. And again, thanks for all you do for the Aero Club and for aviation safety. Just a note, if you have questions for any of our panelists or presenters tonight, use the Q&A function. The question and answer feature. Will be moderating those questions and providing interaction courtesy of Keith Lenhart from ACON, who will present the questions to our panelists as we work through the evening. So without further delay, let's introduce our first panelist. She is a native New Englander with a big shout out to Worcester Polytechnic Institute and Northeastern University, who now represents our 6 New England states. She's been working with and for the FAA since 2006. and serves as the FAA's New England Regional Administrator. She's a friend of aviation and a friend of the Aero Club of New England. Please join me in welcoming Administrator Colleen D'Alessandro. Good evening, Colleen.
Hi, thank you, David. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for allowing me the privilege of speaking to you on behalf of the FAA in the New England region. I'm not a pilot, but I'm excited to be part of today's crash course. And I'd like to start off by saying that the agency remains vigilant during our public health emergency. And despite the challenges, our commitment to safety hasn't wavered. So thank you for sponsoring this crash course, and thank you for the incredible work that you do within the aviation community. So aviation plays a key role in jumpstarting our economy, in part by getting COVID-19 vaccines to people. And once we're freely moving about the world, aviation will again fundamentally redefine geographic boundaries and connect people and cultures from every corner of the planet. In October, the FAA formed the COVID-19 vaccine air transport team to make sure the global pharmaceutical industry could safely speed vaccines to the people who need them most. Teams from multiple disciplines across the agency are seeing to it that airlines have the assistance they need to safely carry out the mission. At the same time, our FAA family is grieving the loss of several of our own from COVID-19. And at the last count, that was 20 employees. Their untimely passing leaves a big hole in our workforce and in the hearts of their coworkers. But we joined Administrator Dixon in honoring their memories and their families by continuing the agency's important work, particularly as it relates to COVID-19 response and recovery, and now vaccine distribution. From a local perspective, our New England region remains committed to our FAA mission and commitment to all facets of aviation safety. While our mission is to operate the world's largest and most complex airspace system, we have an equal obligation to ensure the health and safety of our employees, and we appreciate the public's support and patience. In many areas, we've actually been able to strengthen our outreach while working fully virtually. So if some of you may have noticed, before winter descended on New England, there were a variety of construction projects going on at various airports. Many of these were funded by a share from the local community, along with federal funding, which should make your flight experience into these airports even better. We continue to be proud of our relationships with airport sponsors, and I know we are both committed to introducing as many safety improvements as possible. So as you continue to patronize the airports and introduce aviation to new users through New England's many flight schools, think about your role in keeping the system safe. Each towered airport across the country has a yearly runway safety action team meeting. Pilots are an important stakeholder as airport users. Your perspective is a valuable one, so please consider participating in your local airport runway safety meeting. So while the folks here today share our love for aviation, the FAA continues to be sensitive to those residing in the vicinity of aircraft activity. In 2020, the FAA launched an online noise portal to enable us to more efficiently and effectively respond to and address noise complaints in a clear, consistent, and repeatable manner. The portal provides a web-based platform for the public to share concerns about aircraft noise. And because there's often multiple contributing factors to community concerns about aviation and noise, they need to be addressed by everyone who has a role in aviation. And that means all aviation stakeholders, from local airport authorities and GA pilots, like all of you, to the airlines. We all must take an ownership stake as we work with communities to address noise issues. So I don't want to end without mentioning the importance of STEM education and FAA's continued focus on aviation and space education. We all know the challenges with a diminishing supply of qualified pilots, mechanics, and technicians. At a time when we need to see interest in aviation careers going up, the data is trending in the opposite direction. And at the same time, we have new entrants into the aviation world, like drones in commercial space. And those are leading to a need for people in new and evolving skills. The FAA administrator places a high priority on addressing impending aviation workforce shortages and working collaboratively with all of our partners to attract and train a diverse and highly skilled workforce that will enable our aviation system to continue to thrive and evolve while continuing to maintain the highest levels of safety. So I challenge each of you in the audience to take an active role in attracting young people to the world of aviation. I'll conclude my opening remarks by sharing that my staff and I are ready to assist you and your communities throughout our 6 New England states. Although we may not have an immediate response to your inquiry, we do have access to experts from across the FAA and from industry to help to answer your questions. So we'll do our best to make sure we can do that in a timely fashion. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the seminar.
Thank you, Administrator D'Alessandro. Thank you so much. Thanks for your continued and your team's commitment to safety in aviation. Really do appreciate it. And appreciate you making time to be here with us tonight. We're going to move to our first presenter for Crash Course this evening, who's also a friend of aviation and a great friend of the Aero Club of New England. He's a career-long advocate, not just for general aviation, but for general aviation safety. Stephen K. Brown has logged over 7,000 hours as a flight instructor, having personally trained over 80 different flight instructors. He regularly flies a variety of different aircraft, from gliders to ski planes to powered parachutes and corporate jets. The Aero Club of New England is grateful for his long-standing support for Crash Course, and we have all benefited from his commitment to aviation safety. So he currently serves as the FAA's FAAST team program manager, and we're very pleased to have him with us tonight. Stephen K. Brown, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I almost wonder who that guy is there. But hey, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. A terrific program is definitely coming up, which I think you're going to learn a lot. And I'm going to ask you, for your own proficiency's sake, be ready to take some notes with what we're covering tonight. What we are going to do is I'm going to go through as quick as I possibly can, just what we saw on the recent accidents and incidents that occurred in the Boston FSDO in fiscal year 2020. That's the FAA fiscal year from October 1, 2019 to the end of September of 2020. Now, I do this because across New England and across the country, we'll find that many of the accidents are very similar. But a few things, and we do this with the Aero Club of New England. I know there's terrific events that they hold throughout the year. Everything that I do and I ask of the safety reps that we work with is, if you can help to promote, educate, and improve aviation, we're all going to be the much better for it. Now, just if you don't know, we do have what we call the New England FAAST team, but people that do the same type of thing that I do across New England with different FSDOs. In Bradley, we have Dan Carter and Rob Leonard. That's myself and John Wood. We're the operations FAAST team program managers for Portland and Boston. And then recently joining John Wood up in Portland, Maine on the airworthiness side is John Bell. Now, a lot of what we do is through FAAsafety.gov, and if you haven't been there recently or at all, I would encourage you to go take a quick peek, because it's constantly changing, constantly updating, including one of the things that is uniquely New England. We recently had uploaded an online course on the Alton Bay Ice Runway. You know, that is something that is unique, definitely, to New England. And I also do ask, this is part of what tonight is about, is, are you a proficient pilot? Not just a current pilot, but a proficient pilot. And with that, are you part of an organization where you get the mentorship that you need, the direction that you need, and that you're doing some annual checking of your proficiency? No matter what type of aircraft you fly in, whether it's, you know, large airliner, that's probably already being done. But if you're stepping down to some of the smaller type of stuff, you probably need some annual proficiency checking for that also. And if you don't have a program, we do have the Wings program. You've probably heard of it before. If you need help with it, we have Wings pros that are out there that can help you get set up and get you pointed off in the right direction. Just type in the word Wings Pro in the directory and it'll bring you to the people in your area. And I do want to thank you for joining us tonight, because part one of this, of the Wings program, is the knowledge. And there's 3 different knowledge credits associated with that. But what we all need, and this is a picture of me flying with an instructor a few years ago, we all need part 2, which is the flight proficiency. And there's 3 credits on that also. This is typical for what you'll see of the private pilot level, instrument, and commercial. And another added benefit, which we've seen be a bonus here in New England, is there is also a $10,000 sweepstakes, not $10,000 prize, but $10,000 worth of sweepstakes with the Wings program. When you complete a level, or as an instructor that you're working with students to complete a level. We actually had a couple people win this past year. Some of you may know, right here from the Boston area is Vicky Kuo from Horizon Aviation, was one of the winners of this program because she does wings with many of her students and got a very pleasant surprise that paid for her proficiency training this past year. Now, for the Boston FSDO, I say literally and figuratively, and it's very true, we are the Rhode Island FSDO. We're one of the smallest ones in the entire nation, but we have a lot going on. We have, for FSDOs, probably the most number of tower-controlled airports. We're one of the few FSDOs in the country that we oversee an entire terminal control area, Class Bravo airspace. And what we want to help you with tonight is make sure that your airplane only goes into the hangar for the right reasons, not the wrong reasons. And if you look at a national trend, you can see the accident total number has gone down. Mr. McSpadden, who you'll hear from, is probably happy because not only has that accident rate gone down, but the amount of flying has gone up at the same time. So the accident rate has decreased, which is absolutely terrific. And that's the trend we want to keep seeing. Here in New England for fiscal year 2020, this is what we had for the accidents. Most of them occurred in Massachusetts this past year. Last year it was Maine. Also, the accidents in Massachusetts were split between the Bradley FSDO, a few of them there, and most of the Massachusetts accidents were in what the Boston FSDO district. Across New England, we had 3 fatal accidents. The one in Connecticut, we probably all know, a very, very horrific accident involving a B-17, major loss of life. That was right at the very, very beginning of the year. And then we had 2 fatal accidents that occurred in Massachusetts. Both of them involved only the pilot on board the aircraft, so no loss of life of others, one in the Bradley FSDO and one in the Boston FSDO. But no matter who is flying, what type of pilot, none of them want to have an accident, no matter where they are flying. This may be an interesting note to you, but if we look at the pilots from New England, this is where they had their accidents across the United States. Of course, most of them are here in New England, but we see some out on the West Coast. We also see quite a few focused in on the Northeast. Also, if we look at just general aviation, not necessarily the accidents, but the things that catch our attention from safety, and this is where you probably kind of want to start taking notes, is pilot deviations for airspace and ATC clearances. Incidents, of course, not an accident, something a little bit short, but also we're seeing runway lineup and other items. And instructors and others, do get ready to take notes here, because I'm going to also try to give you some takeaways from each of these accidents. So what were our major issues? You'll hear this, from the FAA, from AOPA and others. Loss of control, especially on approach and landing, takeoff and departure. Maintenance. We had some maintenance accidents this year. Expanded pre-flight of your aircraft can help. Checking it after it comes out of the maintenance shop. Operator error, checklist usage, following manufacturer's recommended procedures. Airspace incursions are another issue, along with runway incursions, excursions, and lineups, particularly at a few airports in New England, such as Burlington, Vermont, Bedford, Massachusetts, and of course, Boston, Logan. If you look at what were, for the Boston FSDO, the primary causal factors of pilot-induced error by far was the largest. Improper maintenance was the second. Contributing factors is loss of control, emergency landings, component failures. These are the things that we end up seeing in our accidents and incidents, and this is from fiscal year 2020. And what's also interesting, and why I ask that you get out and do proficiency checking at least once a year, is these are the incidents and accidents cross-referencing the age and the number of months since a person's flight review. You'll notice we have a couple that are beyond the 24 limit of the regulation, but also if we put in the year timeline, you'll notice almost all of our accidents were with people that were beyond 1 year since they did a flight review. You'll also notice a couple of these down here. This is kind of that infant accident rate. We'll see both of these were people that either had recently gotten a new certificate or recently endorsed for solo type operations. So quickly for the accidents in Boston, we had 8 accidents. All of them were airplane. The first one that we had was this aircraft here. This is a picture of it out in Idaho with its previous owner. It was a fairly new airplane to this owner and was a non-fatal accident. 2 people on board, no injuries, loss of control on the ground. Some added information on the pilot, commercial airplane single, age 53, basic med. Yes, the NTSB and the FAA both are tracking the accident rates associated with basic med. It is something that with the rule when it was passed by Congress was put in and that we are taking a look at that. Not a bad thing, not a good thing. It is just something that we are tracking. Flight review had been 13 months. However, it is interesting, had gotten their tailwheel endorsement, but no sign off for a flight review just 1 hour or 1 month prior. And in the past, even couple of years, only 55 hours. All of that had been in the last 90 days, last year, all in this type of aircraft because they had only owned it for 3 months. And the runway is listed is 1,100 feet long by 25 feet wide. Now, if you look at the identifier of MA55, you might be asking where it is, because I was wondering myself. I've probably flown over it hundreds, if not even thousands of times. And, you know, it's out here on Nantucket, and you know the large Nantucket airport. You may even know Tuckernuck, the private airport there that used to be on the sectional chart. But where this airport is that Muscat Island, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, which is this tiny little island out here even further. And take a look at it on Google Earth or whatever. You know, I've never noticed an airport there, runway, or something I would include as a runway. And looking at Google Earth, I have a hard time trying to find it. But here's what was said to the NTSB. And this is what it ended up looking like once it had all occurred. It had ended up basically an airplane in the bushes. Bad day for the insurance company, getting the aircraft off of the island. You know, that is definitely a bummer. Bad day for the pilot, but not that bad of a day. Nobody was hurt. You know, brushes are soft, which is good. And here's what the NTSB had as the findings on that. Now, some of the things I would say in terms of takeaways on this is decision-making experience is get some experience before you go out and try to do some of the more advanced type of flying. Probably even getting, if you do any outback flying, getting some training specifically on it. And if you're going to odd airports, you know, if you can, go by other means first and look over the airport if it's there, using all the available resources. Weather cameras and airport cameras are becoming very prolific now, and I would say use those as much as you can. Here's what the NTSB had for issues on it. And then the next accident that we had a little bit later in the year, in November, was one of the fatal accidents in Massachusetts. A sad event, as it always is. This pilot, I did know. We did see him at some of our safety seminars, you know, a conscientious private pilot. It is still a preliminary Part 91 personal in his own personally owned Cessna 150, just himself. Had private pilot airplane, single engine land, 74 years old, flight review 15 months prior. Almost all of his total flight time was in this particular aircraft. In fact, he actually tended to fly a certain route quite often, and it appears that's what he was doing this particular day. The aircraft was annualed back in June, but had only had 14 hours on it since its last annual. Description of what ended up doing: departed on kind of the normal flight, 2,500, but then ended up gradual descent down as low as 300 feet MSL, and then a rapid climb up to 4,000, and then descended in a rapid left circular pattern. And one of the things that is noted is the cabin heat control was found in the full aft position. Now, these are horrific accidents always, and this is what the accident site looked like after. Very, very high energy impact. It is still preliminary, but one of the things from a safety perspective that I give you as a takeaway is here in New England, we've seen some accidents similar to this, and rarely are they non-fatal accidents. So we are paying attention to carbon monoxide poisoning and what may be involved with that. So I recommend get a carbon monoxide detector for your aircraft. You know, you can choose what is best for your budget, your aircraft, your conditions. But here in New England, it is something that you probably do want in your powered aircraft. The next one was just before Christmas. It was in Cherokee. It is final. It was an instructional flight. No injuries. It was a collision during takeoff, landing. A little bit more information. It was a pilot, student pilot, and a flight instructor. Most of this information here is for the flight instructor, who was 22 years of age, third class medical. Flight review had completed only 4 months prior. That was their CFI practical test, had just gotten their flight instructor certificate just a couple months prior, and had 366 hours total, 46 in the make and model. The student had 270 hours, almost all of it in the make and model. And this was at Cranland Airport, in which the weather conditions were wind 210 at 10, gust to 18, with them landing on runway 36. The description was the aircraft floated down. We'll see that in a moment. About a quarter of the way down, they decided to go ahead and start initiating a go around, and then decided that they would not initiate the go around. And this is what the airport surveillance showed. And we see this a lot now, is so many of these accidents, we do have useful video information on this. You may notice the windsock and the tetrahedron at the airport, and it did come to a stop down off of the end of the runway and looked similar to here. NTSB probable cause and findings that they had. And one of the things I point out about this accident as a takeaway is not only as an instructor must you be able to teach risk management and decision-making to your student, but you need to practice it at a much, much higher level. You have to manage the risk of the instructional environment, which is greater than a lot of the typical type of flying that all of us will do as general aviation pilots. The next one was a Cape Air aircraft. It is final. It was a Part 91 positioning flight. Thankfully, no passengers on board. Cessna 402C. Non-fatal, no injuries, the system component malfunction failure. Pilot information. The NTSB says commercial flight instructor. I know the pilot personally, and I know he does have an ATP, including the form he sent to the NTSB said ATP, but for some reason in their final report, they put commercial. Age 52, first class medical, 10,800 hours in type, 2750 in the make and model. I put this in more so as an interest, is the airframe is about as old as the pilot, but has twice as many flight hours. And thankfully it was in VMC conditions. What they had, according to the operator, door warning light and the crew door hatch open. They did test it later and found that all the warning systems and everything were working properly. And this is what it ended up looking like, with the door slamming on top of the roof of the aircraft. Now, it's interesting to note this style of aircraft has had previous events which have been a little bit worse. You know, people losing headsets out the window, fractured hands as they've reached for the door, and even a separated broken shoulder or two in the past. The probable cause was the pilot's failure to properly secure the crew hatch and the findings that they have with it. What I have for takeaways here is think about checklists and complacency is, you know, if you've been flying a lot, don't just fall into habits, double check yourself with a checklist. And that's something that proficiency training will remind you of as you go about this. And also because I've kind of seen this type of thing in the past, think about your reaction to an accident like this, where that door all of a sudden may have swung open and started hitting, and the noise and the air blast with it. This was February, pretty cold, but at least nice IMC. Now think about it if you had to deal with it with passengers in the back, 20 or 30 minutes from the airport versus out on your initial climb at night during the day. IMC conditions instead of VMC conditions. And even think about it, you know, if you were injured as the pilot, you know, with a broken hand or dislocated shoulder, and maybe even losing your headsets has happened, you know, that could be a very exciting time, I guess, for a pilot. And that's something to think about. Can you handle situations like that? Because a lot of the training many of us have had focus in on only one issue at a time. But many accidents, when we look at them, we know are compounded issues. Right about the same time as this last year, as all of us were starting to talk about COVID, we had this accident, still preliminary, student pilot, minor injuries. Most of the injuries actually were on getting out of the aircraft and from the actual accident itself, and that's something else to consider. First class medical, fairly young pilot, 38 hours, all in the make and model, was doing takeoffs and landings on runway 16 at Beverly with the winds 100 at 6. However, what did occur is during a subsequent takeoff, a loss of power, and decided to make a quick 270 turn around to runway 27, which ended up putting them with a bit of a tailwind. And then airplane touched down the last quarter of the runway. You look at the video on it, it's much more than quarter of the runway. They were right at the very, very far end of it. And this is how the aircraft ended up. You may have seen this on the news. Some of the takeaways for now is switching the fuel tanks on the Pipers. Remember, there is no evidence of fuel starvation in this particular case, but that's something every time we see an accident like this that really catches our attention. Also because, you know, the pilot had to work at this. Think about extrication escape procedures for you and your passengers. You can see the wing folded up against the pilot door. That was a little bit of a challenge for them. Also talking about carburetor heat usage in the Piper is take a look at the manual. It doesn't say necessarily for this model to put it on and leave it on, but you may want to check it from time to time. And also don't forget section 10 of the pilot operating handbook, which has the safety tips. And there's even a safety tip in here which could apply to these type of operations where it says The shape of the wing fuel tanks is such that in certain maneuvers, the fuel may move away from the tank outlet. If the outlet is uncovered, the fuel flow may be interrupted and a temporary loss of power may result. Pilots can prevent inadvertent uncovering of the outlet by avoiding maneuvers which could result in uncovering the outlet. Extreme running, turning, takeoff should be avoided as fuel flow interruption may occur. You know, all little things like that we start to pick up when we look at the accidents and incidents. Later in March, we had a Cirrus over at Minuteman Stowe. It was personal one, non-fatal again, which is what, if we do have incidents and accidents, we don't want people to get hurt. It's easier to fix metal than it is to fix people. Private pilot, age 63, flight review 16 months prior, third class medical, 458 hours, 15 in the make and model, BMC conditions. Winds were 330 at 14 gusts to 25 and was landing runway 3. Was actually coming back from picking up the aircraft from having ADS-B installed in it. This is what the pilot reported. This is just a couple notes from the NTSB report. Is started to veer to the left, added power, which with torque effect, left turning tendencies would probably make it veer a bit more to the left, and it ended up in the bushes like this. I kind of note with this as a takeaway is think about it. You might see the water down here. This was a cool, blustery March day, not as nice as today was. Are you ready to walk through bushes like that, thickets, and maybe even tromp through some ice cold water? Something to be prepared for. That's what the aircraft looked like, and the pilot's failure to maintain directional control is what the NTSB found as the probable cause. Some of the other findings, a few things that I give you as a takeaway is personal minimums. Keep them lower until you get at least 25 hours time and type. We definitely do kind of see that mark. You know, what the pilot said they had for weather would give them about a 16 knot crosswind component. What the NTSB pulled up for weather was a 22 knot crosswind component. The demonstrated crosswind component is 21 knots for this aircraft. Something the pilot mentioned to the NTSB, which is good information for everybody, is kind of reflecting back on it, said, you know, it's okay sometimes to say no to going flying. And, you know, that's what they wish they had done on that accident. This Mooney was involved in an accident at Block Island in the summertime. This is one of those that probably should have just been an incident, but because of the damage, ended up being classified as an accident. Non-fatal, 2 people on board, no injuries. Private pilot, airplane, single engine land, age 60. Flight review 18 months prior, 550 hours, 390 in the make and model. However, only 18 hours in the past year. And you may have noticed that with a lot of our accidents, and we see it a lot with our incidents too, very, very little flight time in the past year. And if that's the case, that's when you really need to get out and do that proficiency checking. Landed runway 28, started to veer, slid back and forth, and ended up in this position here. What I would give you for takeaways right now, and I used to teach a lot, have a little bit over 1,500 hours of dual given in this make and model of aircraft. And I actually used to use an older AOPA study on the M20Js. But energy management and control on landing can be very, very critical in some aircraft. And I used to use this statistic a lot with students. In that AOPA study, they found 113 M20J landing accidents. Only 2 out of the 113 accidents were landing short. All the others were overruns and excursions off the side of the runway. Aircraft that requires essential energy management. And like I said, if you're not flying much, do a proficiency check or review every year. The last one was this Ercoup down in West Kingston, Rhode Island, Richmond, Rhode Island. Non-fatal. It is listed only, not even a preliminary report by the NTSB right now. Private pilot airplane, single engine land. Flight review was 17 months prior, 1,200 hours total, 290 in the make and model, but only 15 hours in the past year. Again, highlighting that that is something you want to consider. If you're not flying much, definitely do an annual check. And what happened is lost power shortly after takeoff and did a 180 to land in a nearby field. And it would not have been an accident if they had not hit the solar arrays. It just ended up the field available was one with the solar arrays. And the thing I can give you as a takeaway right now is what Bob Hoover said is fly the aircraft through the entire accident. Now, from the Boston side of things and just from the safety is more than just not having an accident. Here are some of the non-accidents we saw where we believe pilot was pulling up the gear handle before liftoff. 767 slide banging on the side of the aircraft for a while, then departed and ended up in someone's yard. Some we suspect are accidents to begin with, but end up not being. This was an incident, but maintenance related. The aircraft was not damaged enough to meet the criteria for an accident, but then was substantially damaged, almost destroyed in the recovery. But this incident appears to be maintenance related as the throttle cable became disconnected only 12 hours after a newly overhauled engine was installed. And here's one, non-accident. We had a pilot that purposely put this aircraft down on the highway, gear up, because we train for this, although it doesn't happen as much as we would think, but truly had the engine blow up on them in cruise, blew a hole out the side of the engine, just cruising along, and all of a sudden, bang, at night. And, decided to put it down on the highway. Thankfully, everybody's safe, very quiet highway, decided to do it gear up so that would come to a stop, sacrifice the aircraft. Everybody walked away. And this is one where, we as FAA people actually kind of patted the pilot on the back and said, good job. Sometimes it gets a little bit uglier. Rough landings or landing short of the runway. What I got to point out to you is always think about how close are we to having an accident and how are you really being safe. Some of you may recognize the building here in the background of this picture that I had taken. That's just the other side of that van is my office. But I looked at this van one day in our parking lot and I'm like, what are the signs? And you zoom up on it and you start to realize here's a driver that's trying to be safe, but maybe we have more issues than can be solved by just a sign, and that's what I want you to kind of think about a little bit tonight is what is it that you can do to be safe and what things are you doing to be safe that maybe you can do a little bit better. So again, I thank you, and hope that you do promote, educate, and improve. And the big thing here is go flying, is the more you fly, the more proficient you are. So thank you very much. Here's my contact info if you do need to get a hold of me. And I appreciate you spending the time with me this evening.
Nice job, Stephen. I think Keith, who has been monitoring the question room, is I think going to come forward with a question if we have any questions.
Stephen, thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. And it is a testament to how well you present these accident scenarios every year that I do not have any questions in the so that's the first. So what I'll do is I'll ask my question, which is in your experience, what's the most common probable cause found in the incidents in your career?
In my career, and I'm giving you personal opinion, but it probably fits with this, is it's proficiency, crosswinds, takeoff, landing, energy management, checklist usage. It's that general pilot stuff. If you do a good job at practicing the takeoffs and landings, you're probably going to do fairly well. What we do have happen, we have some airports. I know, Keith, you're at a much larger airport in New England, but we do have some smaller airports, and maybe people going to those before they've mastered those skills on the larger airports. You can use the runway markings like at your airport and focus in on what a shorter runway is, and also assess your glide path on clearing obstacles certain distances away with it. You can do a terrific job of narrowing down your focus on crosswind capabilities, width of runway, length of runway at a larger airport before you ever go to a smaller airport. And that's what it is. We see a lot of people off the side of the runway, especially at the smaller airports.
Stephen, thank you so much for that. David, we'll throw it back to you. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you don't mind, Steve.
Thank you, Keith. Stephen, thank you. The background and the research and the analysis that you put into each and every one of these accidents is always so impressive. It's also great that whether the aircraft involved is large or small, there's something that we can take away from just about each one of these accidents or incidents. So thank you very, very much for joining us again tonight for Crash Course. Our final presenter tonight serves as Senior Vice President of the Air Safety Institute. Also hosts, by the way, a podcast, which I just discovered about a month ago called There I Was, the Aviation Podcast. It is must-listen material for any pilot. Richard McSpadden has logged over 5,000 hours, many as the #1 pilot flight leader for the United States Air Force Thunderbirds. The flight demo team. He's a graduate of the U.S. Air Force War College. He's a licensed commercial pilot, CFI, MEI, SES, MES. He may have acquired a new rating since we began this event tonight. I'm not sure. He is an incredible advocate for general aviation and aviation safety in particular. He's worked with the Aero Club on a number of events, and we're really, really thrilled to have him here tonight. Richard McSpadden, good evening and welcome.
Hey, David, thank you so much. I'm just delighted to be with ACON again, and just sorry that we're not in person. This is one of my favorite events. It really kind of kicks off the season for us every year. And we've been a partner with ACON since well before my time. And I think that's in large thanks to Dr. Kearney and others who started this. And I just want to thank Dr. Kearney for his support of safety across all of general aviation. He and I have had some great conversations about safety. So just delighted to be here. Steve, I loved your presentation. You hit so much on the topics of things that we think are important in the Air Safety Institute, and especially the very last one, go fly. The best thing you can do to be a safe pilot is go get as proficient as you can be in whatever platform you're flying. So, and like Steve mentioned, we have some really good news in safety in terms of how we've made it through this pandemic. We were all wondering about that about a year ago, and maybe a little bit less. ASI put out a return to flying guide for people that had been maybe not as proficient during the pandemic. And the reality is this has really showcased general aviation safety very well. Activity across general aviation is booming in many sectors of GA. If you go to your local airport now, go to your local flying school, good luck renting an airplane. Good luck finding a spot in the pattern. If you're flying here at Frederick, it's not uncommon to have the tower hold you outside the pattern because they're just full. So all of that is great. And the best news is I co-chair the General Aviation Steering Committee with the FAA, my FAA counterpart. And we're off to the best year in safety that we've had in over 20 years. And that's coming out of a pandemic. And it just says a great deal about general aviation pilots and how they view safety. And it's in large thanks to organizations like this that help us support it across so heavily. So I just want to congratulate you all. Let's keep it up. You know, you always have to caveat, it's early. I know Steve would agree with me. It's early. We don't want to get too excited about the data, but it sure does look good. So for tonight, what I'd like to do is share with you first some stats in terms of how we're doing in safety and specifically what weather related incidents look like. And then we'll view the latest Air Safety Institute videos. These videos are on our YouTube channel, and our material is accessed over 12 million times a year. David, you gave us a nice shout out for our podcast, There I Was, and I want to thank you for your help with that podcast and your advice on it, and also your help with our videos as well. You've helped us with narration through the years. So we're going to show this video, and then we'll come back after the video and just talk about some things and have a discussion. Keith will be in the Q&A portion, so if you'd like to make a comment, if you'd like to ask a question, please do so. These are much better when they're interactive, which is why they're much better when we have them in person. But that's how we'll do it this evening, and we'll all see how it goes. So, and then we'll talk about some of the lessons. So let's take a look at some of the statistics in terms of weather. You can see where weather-related incidents fall in terms of pilot-related. Steve mentioned the percentage of accidents that are pilot-related, and we're still hovering up around the 75–80% of pilots or accidents are pilot-related. And there's a couple of takeaways from this slide in particular. Look how many of those are weather-related, and look what percentage of them are fatal. And the big takeaway here is if you mess around with weather and you're not prepared for it, and it's not just VFR pilots, it's IFR pilots who are not proficient. It's IFR pilots who are proficient, but not proficient in that platform with that avionics package. Those are some real warning, real problematic territory for you. And we encourage you to get proficient before you attempt to go in the weather. And if you're not, please forego it, because as you can see, if you have an incident, you're very unlikely to survive it. And as you see, the good news is over about the last 25 years, we've dropped the fatal accident rate in general aviation by about 50%, which is great, but we're still having roughly 2 weather-related fatality accidents a month. And I think we would all agree that's just too many. We can take a look now into, so how do they break down? And this is why we, the FAA, the NTSB, anybody who studies this is so concerned about VFR into IMC. As you can see there, we're having still roughly one a month. I know you've heard a lot about it. We've preached a lot about it, as has the FAA and others. And yet still we lose a pilot a month stumbling into IMC conditions. And I want to just stress that it's not just VFR pilots. There's a fair amount of IFR pilots that are just either not proficient or not proficient in that airplane that have the issue. So those are things we'd like to go after. And the thing we'll talk about tonight are the icing incidents. And you can see we still have a few of those a year. Here's the really good news slide. You can see how we've been reducing weather-related accidents even over the last, 11 years. We've cut them roughly in half. Now, of course, there are some bumps here and there where it'll drop. I wish I could explain 2016 to you. Maybe it was just a great weather year. But still, even over time, you can see how much we've reduced our weather-related accidents. And I think that's a combination of all the things that we stress in safety. And if you want to be a safer pilot, you really have to work all 5 principles of the safety model: knowledge, training, proficiency, reliable equipment, and then surround yourself in a culture that helps you enable good decision-making. Cultures like you see here tonight and you see in ACON. Those are really the 5 principles. And I think we've driven this down over time by hitting all 5 of those principles. So let's go ahead and watch this short video, and then we'll come back and have a discussion about it.
It's the morning of April 16, 2018, and a Beechcraft Bonanza, November 9345 Quebec, is flying IFR over central Ohio. The pilot and his passenger are en route to DeLand Municipal Airport in Florida. Instrument conditions prevail in the airplane's current location, and the Bonanza is accumulating light rime icing at 4,000 feet. The pilot descends to 3,000 feet to clear the clouds and hopefully eliminate the ice.
Okay, we're underneath the clouds right now. Looks like it's clearing up. We're about 1 degree over Celsius.
4 o'clock, Quebec, roger. Thank you.
About 1 minute later, the controller notices that the Bonanza has further descended to 2,700 feet.
4 o'clock, Quebec, low altitude alert. Take altitude immediately. NBA in your area is 2,900.
Okay, right now we've been getting some buffeting. We got some Rhine mice, but we're losing.
On 4 Pocket Back, Roger, you need to land?
Negative right now. We're clearing up.
Roger.
We're about 4 degrees over Celsius, 0 now.
Roger. On 4 Pocket Back, use caution and MVA in that area is 2,900.
Yeah, I understand. 2,900, 456.
Despite the pilot's assurances, the Bonanza's descent continues. It's now at 2,200 feet MSL, only 1,000 feet AGL.
On 4 Pocket Back, how you doing, sir?
We're doing okay right now. Waiting for this ice to dissipate.
It's the last transmission the pilot will make to the controller. A minute later, the airplane's altitude shows 1,500 feet before it suddenly disappears from radar. The Bonanza impacts terrain near the town of Warsaw, Ohio, killing both the pilot and his passenger. Sadly, these aren't the only lives that will be claimed by icing in the days ahead. A mere 200 miles to the east, another fatal aviation accident will soon unfold. It's now April 19th, 3 days later. At Lancaster Airport in Pennsylvania, a Cirrus SR-22, November 451 Tango Delta, is preparing to depart on an early morning cross-country flight to South Bend International Airport in Indiana. The private pilot and his passenger are traveling to attend a conference being held at an Indiana university. The pilot obtained a weather briefing using ForeFlight at 9:27 p.m. the night before, with a planned departure time of 6:45 a.m. this morning. The graphical forecast products from his briefing predicted cloud cover as low as 2,000 feet MSL, around 800 to 1,000 feet AGL, along the route of flight, and the surface forecast predicted marginal VFR conditions with likely snow shower activity. Meanwhile, terminal forecasts for several airports along the route of flight called for IFR and low IFR conditions during the airplane's passing time. The ForeFlight briefing also included airmets for IFR conditions, mountain obscuration, and moderate icing at various levels. However, these airmets were only valid until 5 o'clock a.m. on April 19th, which was before the intended departure time. After receiving the weather briefing, the pilot filed an IFR flight plan with a planned cruising altitude of 6,000 feet MSL. Now, at 7:34 a.m., the Cirrus begins its departure. The 500-hour pilot is instrument-rated and current, with 28 hours of actual IMC logged. In the last 6 months, he's flown 4 flights with his instructor for the purpose of maintaining instrument currency and proficiency. Although last night's weather briefing warned of unfavorable conditions along his route, the pilot has decided to proceed with the trip. However, there's a troubling omission in his flight planning. An updated airmet advisory was recorded via the flight plan identification number at 4:52 a.m., but there is no record that the pilot retrieved this new information. If he had obtained an updated briefing, he would see that hazardous conditions are now active during the time he'll be passing through. The new airmets warn of moderate icing between the freezing level and 16,000 feet, IFR and mountain obscuration, and low-level turbulence valid until 11 a.m. Unfortunately, this Cirrus is not equipped with an anti-icing or de-icing system. The pilot and his passenger, unaware of the new weather information, set off for Indiana. It's now an hour later. Cirrus 451 Tango Delta is about 10 miles past the city of Altoona, Pennsylvania, cruising at 5,500 feet, when the pilot makes a call to ATC.
Johnstown, this is Cirrus 451 Tango Delta with a request.
Cirrus 1 Tango Delta, say request.
Just curious, if you know what the tops are of the cloud?
I do not have any tops reports standby. Let me call center and see if they have any of that area. Okay, 1 Tango Delta. Center has tops report about 25 northwest of your position, around 17,000.
17,000 is the tops of the ceiling cloud?
Yeah, they said that was the tops in that area.
All right, we were just in a lot of IMC. What's the bottom? Is it 4,000?
It could be lower than that. I'm showing here at Johnstown, which is 18 miles southwest of you. We have our cloud deck starts at 200 feet.
All right, that doesn't help me.
A minute later, the reason for the pilot's request to ATC becomes more clear.
Johnstown, this is 451 Tango Delta.
Say again?
This is Cirrus 451 Tango Delta. We're getting a little ice up here. I think I should probably get down to Johnstown.
Okay, so you want to divert to Johnstown, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Can you vector me?
1 Tango Delta, affirmative, sir. You're clear to Johnstown via radar vectors. It'll be an ILS runway 33 approach, turn left heading 160. Actually, correction, make it 170 heading vector to the ILS.
170.
And if you get the chance, the type of icing you're getting, the intensity, and the outside air temperature, please.
It's a little not bad, but it's enough to get me a little concerned.
Copy that, thank you.
The pilot's conversation with ATC indicates that he understands the severity of the situation, and he has decided his best course of action is to get on the ground.
What runway am I expected to go into, Johnstown?
1 Tango Delta, it's runway 33, the ILS, and we are having traffic information uniform. And we're showing a ceiling at 200 overcast, so that's right at the mint there for the ILS. If you still want to try it, that's fine. If not, I'm showing Altoona's weather is a little bit better. They report, or they're showing 500 overcast right now.
All right, let's go to Altoona.
With Altoona looking like the better option, the pilot alters his course. The airport is 25 miles to the southeast.
1 Tango Delta, roger. Does ILS 21 work for you?
That'd be good. What? Can you vector me that?
Yep, absolutely. 1 Tango Delta, continue left turn heading 100 vector to ILS.
100. Think I could get down to 4,000?
1 Tango Delta, descend and maintain 4,500. That'll be the lowest I can get you for a little bit.
4,500.
Cirrus 1 Tango Delta, advise when you do have the weather and NOTAMs at Altoona, and if you need me to, I can read the weather for you there. I can read the earliest observation for them.
Yeah, if you could read the weather, that'd be great.
1 Tango Delta, not a problem, sir. The 1226 Zulu observation, winds 360 at 6, visibility 1 mile, light rain, mist, ceiling is 500 overcast, temperature 6, dew point 4, and the Altoona altimeter is 2970.
What information is that?
That's just off the ASOS there. It's an uncontrolled airport.
Within the next minute, the controller notices the Cirrus changing its heading.
1 Tango Delta, I show you turning about a 200 heading right now. Say intentions.
I'm just going to try to get direct. What direction should I be?
A heading of 090 when able.
090. Yep, I'll get it back on.
Meanwhile, 451 Tango Delta has been steadily descending past 4,500 feet. The Cirrus is at 3,900 feet when the pilot checks in.
And you want me at 4,500?
1 Tango Delta, affirm, sir. Altitude 4,500 on heading of 090.
A minute later, the controller notices that the Cirrus is still at 3,900 feet.
Cirrus 1 Tango Delta, the altimeter is 2970. Just verify your level at 4,500, please.
All right, 4,500. I just dropped a little bit. I'll get it back up.
Okay, thank you, sir.
It's now 2 minutes later, and the pilot has only climbed to 4,100 feet. If his climbing difficulty is indicative of structural icing, the pilot hasn't mentioned it to the controller.
1 Tango Delta, turn 10 degrees to the left.
10 degrees left. 451 Tango Delta.
Attention all aircraft, New Johnstown, altimeter 2971. Cirrus 1 Tango Delta, turn right, heading of 120.
120, 451 Tango Delta.
The Cirrus continues to remain below its designated altitude, averaging 4,100 feet over the previous few minutes.
Cirrus 1 Tango Delta, 5 miles from Will, turn right heading 180, maintain at or above 4,300 till you're established, clear to the ILS 21 Altoona.
All right, 451 Tango Delta, turn right to 180. We're clear for the intercept.
2 minutes pass, and the controller sees that 451 Tango Delta has crossed through the localizer course for runway 21 at Altoona. The pilot hasn't realized the error.
451 Tango Delta, you've already begun through the localizer, sir. Say intentions.
I still want to get there. Can you vector me one more time?
1 Tango Delta, affirmative, sir. Maintain 4,500. Turn left heading 090. It'll be a box pattern back to final.
090, okay. I missed it.
The pilot turns left, but continues his left turn beyond 090. 39 seconds into the turn, the Cirrus begins to descend, and its airspeed increases. The left turn tightens, and the airplane begins to spiral. The Cirrus impacts the ground in a steep, nose-low attitude.
Cirrus 451 Tango Delta, radar contact lost. Cirrus 451 Tango Delta, Johnstown approach. How do you hear me?
A review of weather information current at the time of the flight revealed that the Cirrus most likely encountered IMC about 500 feet AGL on the initial climb out from Lancaster Airport, and remained in IMC in conditions favorable to icing for the rest of the flight. Before the flight, a forecast icing potential indicated that light to moderate intensity icing existed near the accident site, and a current icing potential product indicated that supercooled liquid droplets existed near the accident site. This weather information was available, in addition to the updated AirMet advisory issued at 4:52 a.m. The NTSB could not determine to what degree the Cirrus was affected by structural icing during the approach to Altoona. At minimum, it appeared to affect the airplane's ability to maintain the altitude requested by ATC. In the end, however, icing was only one part of this fatal accident. While the pilot was maneuvering in the last seconds before the crash, he was in IMC with restricted visibility. Combined with the spiraling radar track data and the high-velocity impact with terrain, the circumstances indicated the pilot was likely experiencing spatial disorientation. The airplane's entry into a descending left turn while the pilot was being vectored back toward the localizer course, which subsequently tightened, became what's known as a graveyard spiral. The graveyard spiral can occur from a vestibular illusion associated with the return to level flight following a prolonged banked turn. There are a number of lessons that we can learn from this accident. The first and most obvious is that it's imperative to check the most recent weather conditions before departing on any flight. A study of the forecast the night before across country is always a good idea, but it's only one part of safe and thorough pre-flight planning. Weather is dynamic and ever-changing, and many aviation forecasts are updated every 6 hours, including AirMets and terminal forecasts. Flying with outdated information from a forecast 10 hours old is asking for trouble. Furthermore, with the weather information he reviewed the night before, the pilot already knew about hazardous weather to come, and shouldn't have proceeded with hope that conditions would get better. After all, hope is not a strategy for flying safely. A past, present, future approach can be helpful in identifying and predicting weather trends. For example, where was the weather yesterday or several hours ago? How long did it take to reach its current condition and location? And based on that, when can I expect it to improve or worsen along my route? Another critical lesson is the need to tell ATC what's going on. As the icing accumulated and the reality of the dangerous situation set in, small clues in the pilot's language and actions were possible hints of his growing unease.
It's a little not bad, but it's enough to get me a little concerned. Think I could get down to 4,000?
1 Tango Delta, I show you turning about a 200 heading right now. Say intentions.
I'm just going to try to get direct. What direction should I be?
It appears that the pilot desired a lower altitude, with hope of finding higher temperatures. It also seems that he knew he needed to expedite his approach to the airport, indicated by his intentional, albeit unapproved, change in heading. After the controller told him that 4,500 feet was the lowest altitude he could authorize, and questioned his heading change to 200, the pilot should have countered with more assertive language to make it clear what he needed. For example, I need to get out of icing conditions. I need the lowest possible safe altitude, and I need the most direct course to Altoona. Going one step further and declaring an emergency would have been entirely appropriate. The high workload and stress the pilot was likely experiencing appears to have contributed to his failure to intercept the localizer course for runway 21 at Altoona. It's difficult to say whether the missed intercept had more to do with the icing conditions or the pilot's instrument proficiency. Shortly following was the onset of spatial disorientation. The pilot's spiraling turn and subsequent crash is a stark reminder of the insidious nature of spatial disorientation. It can affect any pilot, even one who is instrument-rated and current. While some details of the pilot's IFR refresher flights in the previous 6 months were published by the NTSB, we don't know their true impact on the pilot's proficiency. It's important that instructors customize training to suit pilots' individual needs and types of flying, especially during seasons of cold, snow, and icing. CFIs should conduct risk management training using real-world scenarios to improve pilots' decision-making. This is an important component of the FAA's Airman Certification Standards. We also don't know how reliant the pilot was on using the Autopilot in the Cirrus. The radar data showed that the airplane was flying a relatively smooth and consistent flight path that was indicative of the pilot using the Autopilot for the majority of the flight, until the final turn after flying through the localizer course. Another suggestion for instructors is to encourage the practice of periodically hand-flying the airplane to keep a pilot's stick and rudder skills sharp. Finally, a small detail discovered during the post-crash investigation proved troubling. The NTSB found that the pilot had not removed the safety pin for the Cirrus airframe parachute system before flight. Removing this safety pin is critical to ensure proper operation of the parachute system. This is a standard Cirrus checklist item, and it appears 3 times. Remove the pin during the pre-flight walk-around, verify it is removed before engine start, and verify once more before takeoff. We don't know if the pilot attempted to pull the parachute before the crash, but if he had, it could have been a life-saving maneuver had the pin been properly removed. The crash of November 451 Tango Delta, as well as the loss of 2 lives in November 9345 Quebec a few days earlier, is a sad and sobering look at the hazardous nature of icing, and the effects it has on both the aircraft and pilot. In the Bonanza accident, the pilot failed to obtain an official weather briefing. In the Cirrus accident, the pilot neglected to obtain an updated briefing. It's a reminder to us that in general aviation, weather is one of the largest factors determining the safety of a flight. In today's flying environment, new technologies provide near real-time weather observations that can help us use the most complete information available to optimize our decisions. If we don't use all of the tools at our disposal to make a full assessment of the weather, we put ourselves and our passengers at risk.
So here are some rough rules of thumb that we thought of and that actually come out of a circular that the FAA put out a few years ago. Very helpful. Also, if you go to the Air Safety Institute website, we have a whole section on weather-related flying and knowledge and other videos besides the one we showed tonight. But the first one is what the circular refers to as that Vigilant Zone. And a lot of people are mistaken in that they think that, as long as I'm above freezing, I'm okay. And you could even hear, I think in the first part of the video, we heard the Bonanza pilot say, oh, I'm okay. I think he said plus 4 degrees Celsius, which is kind of on the ragged edge. but that vigilant zone is a little bit warmer than freezing. It's from 35 degrees Fahrenheit all the way to -4 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can see the Celsius conversion there. I mean, the reason for that is if you're above freezing, but some water is hitting your wings or your other surfaces, as it flows back along those surfaces, which are cold and below the freezing level, then the water will freeze on those surfaces. And this can be particularly bad for tail icing. So that's why it's not just enough to be above freezing. It's still an area of concern. The second thing is that the tops of the clouds are where the water content is often the highest, especially in cumulus clouds. So if you think you're going to climb out of it, that may be a strategy for stratus clouds. In stratus, the layer of icing tends to be thinner, tends to be roughly about 3,000 feet on average. So the best way if you're in stratus clouds to get out of icing is either to climb or descend out of it if you've got room below it. As we saw in the Bonanza video, he really didn't have room below it. And the Cirrus pilot really didn't have much room below it too because the ceilings were so low. What that means when you have more of the liquid water content in the clouds is that's where you get into the rapid icing. And if people have ever experienced rapid icing, it is a really scary thing. There aren't too many things that scare me in the cockpit, but icing and fire are the two things that I found terribly scary, actually. So on cumulus clouds, as I mentioned, that high liquid water content, it tends to be very focused in a cumulus cloud. So your best way to get out of that is usually horizontal. It's going to go quite vertical. So you'll have a difficult time climbing out of that. And that kind of goes to why it's important to know the weather briefing before you go and what kind of conditions and what kind of clouds that you're flying into. A front, for example, there can be a lot of ice associated with the boundary layer of a front. And if you have to penetrate a front, the best way is to go right directly across the front and get through it and not fly along it on either side, because that's where you're going to experience extended periods of icing. And then finally, as we mentioned, tails usually will ice quicker than wings. And the more difficult part of that is you can't see the tail. So that's why people recommend that if you find yourself getting into inadvertent icing and you're out of it and you've come on to approach, you have to assume that icing is still on your airplane. It takes a long time for ice to dissipate off an airplane because your surfaces on the airplane remain cold for so long. So you have to assume that your tail is iced up, and you don't want to use flaps if you've ever encountered any kind of icing. And the icing may still potentially be on your airplane. Even if you don't see it on your wings, it's best to fly a no flap approach.
Richard, we have a question that just popped up from one of our attendees. When in those icing conditions and task saturation for the Cirrus pilot, do you think he should have pulled the chute? It's not an easy decision for us pilots to give up on a flight or a plane at that point because pride is powerful.
Yeah, man, that is a great question. And I think the hard part of that one, this is a really important part of this video. At the very end, the NTSB found in their investigation, the pin to that chute was still inserted. The pilot never pulled the pin. And there's 3 separate times on the before takeoff where that pin is referenced. And so in this case, he would have found that very difficult. But man, that is a really tough one. So don't you think that's so situational dependent? I can tell you, I believe that once you begin to lose situational awareness in the weather, it's very difficult to get it back. And so I would be inclined to do that if I found myself, especially in his case, where I can't maintain altitude for whatever reason. When you see the video, you'll see he can't maintain altitude. Speculation, did he have so much ice that he couldn't? Was he distracted? We don't really know the answer to that. But for sure, he knew that he was flying not as sharp as he would like to. And then when he's in that, when he factors himself through final and is trying to get himself back there, I think in that extended left-hand turn, he must have at some point realized this is not going well. And in my mind, that would have been a good time to pull the chute. If there are Cirrus pilots out there, I'd love to hear from them on that topic as we go along.
one of our members had said, did the aircraft have an autopilot?
Yeah, it had an autopilot. And so, you know, there again, it is a fantastic tool flying IFR. In fact, today, this past week, for the first time in a long time, I had to fly some extended IFR and hand fly it. The plane I was in didn't have an autopilot. And man, that is exhausting. I hate to sound like I'm whining, but I hadn't done that in a while. And hand flying IFR conditions is exhausting. So for sure, it would have been a good idea to engage the autopilot. And especially when he flew through that ILS course, to realize he's going to make a turn. And let me just pause and talk about spatial disorientation a little bit. One thing that we want to keep in mind is that anytime you're in the weather and you go in an extended turn, and the bank doesn't have to be very much, but if you're in an extended bank, the way that your inner ear works is after you've set that bank for a while, your inner ear thinks that's now straight and level. So it's very tough for you to get straight and level because your inner ear is going to think when you turn back straight and level that you're actually in a turn the other way. If you've never had that happen to you, it can be very disorienting. And it's actually very difficult to overcome. It takes a lot of discipline flying off of your instruments. So an autopilot in that case, and anytime you get in one of those long extended terms, they're vectoring you or you're vectoring yourself or you're coming in a descent or whatever. If you know you're going to be in one of those extended turns, just realize you're in a high probability scenario to get spatial disorientation.
Richard, to round out this first question or first section you've got here, can you talk about de-icing versus anti-icing equipment? Can having such gear push pilots into icing conditions?
Yeah, great. Remember that anti-icing equipment is to prevent ice. And so anti-icing equipment, you turn it on before you get into the ice. Anytime you expect you're going to go into icing conditions, you turn it on. And it's meant to be transitory. It's not for extended periods in icing conditions. And most of those don't have any de-icing capability. So in other words, if you listen to our podcast that David referenced, a pilot there was in a Cirrus, he's got his anti-icing running and he's still picking up ice. And he decides very, very appropriately, that's it, I'm out. And he aborted and turned around and went the other way. Anti-icing equipment, by and large, does not have the ability to de-ice your airplane. So that takes you to de-ice, which is an expanded capability, mostly on higher end airplanes, where you can actually release ice. Most of the time it's rubber boots on your the leading edge of your wings or tails or wherever. And once you pick up ice, you actually have to let the ice accumulate for a little bit for it to work properly. Then you activate those boots and they just expand. And by expanding, they break the ice off and it flies off. So those are the two kinds of things. And then I'll just a caution that just because your airplane has anti-icing doesn't mean you're FEAKY meaning flight into known icing. If you have anti-icing, it doesn't mean you're certified FEAKY. You have to really pay attention to when your airplane was certified and what year it was built and see whether or not you're actually FEAKY certified.
That's the questions that we have. Oh, another one just popped up, Richard. What are your thoughts on when and how often to disconnect the autopilot to make sure it hasn't been trimming to compensate for the ice build? That's a great question.
Oh, that is a great question. Wow, I don't know. I think I would love to hear from somebody in the audience who might have a thought on that. If you get some in the Q&A, it seems like a good idea to do maybe. You know, the hard part of that is, especially if you get in, like we mentioned, some of the cumulus clouds where you've got the high liquid content in the clouds. It will amaze you how fast you can ice up and then how slow it is for the ice to dissipate from your airplane. So, well, that's a tough question to answer, but it seems like
we'll leave that one open. And then if any of our attendees have any comments that they want to add, I'll follow up in a little bit with those.
One newer type of aircraft that I've flown and done a lot of check rides in actually has it written in the manual as recommends to do it once every 5 minutes at least.
Wow, 5 minutes.
Okay. You might see that in, you know, the more new an aircraft is, I think the more we've learned about icing and what we can do to overcome it. And you'll see that guidance being put into the approved flight manuals, pilot information manuals more.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Steve. 5 minutes, man, think how quick that goes. So let's move on a little bit and talk about the pilot and the airplane. I want to talk first a little bit about the Bonanza accident. The first one was the first sort of, sort of hair that raises on the back of your neck is he's in an aircraft that's not equipped for icing. He's picked up icing. He's got icing on his airplane. He can't hold altitude. And he tells ATC, oh, I think we're okay for now. We're at 4 degrees Celsius. That's just a heartbreaking call to me because, man, if that's the case that you're in, it's time to take the fastest exit that you can to get out of those conditions. That's the thing that sort of came out of me. And then we'll see in the tail end slide, that particular pilot didn't have a good weather briefing at all. The Cirrus pilot had a delayed weather briefing. It was old, but we didn't have indication that the Bonanza pilot had any weather briefing. So he really didn't know what he was flying into. You always look at how about the pilot in the airplane? Were they berthed? Is it the right pilot in the right airplane for the right mission? And in the case of the Cirrus, it seems like it was. He had those flights with his instructor to make sure he was prepared in IFR conditions. So it seemed like he had prepared himself well. The question was, I wonder how much actual IMC time he had. Everybody's flown a lot of IFR will tell you there's a big difference in flying actual IMC and a simulator, or even in flying under the hood. I wonder how much actual IMC he had and whether or not that might have been a factor to help him in the very last stages when it looks like he had spatial disorientation. Okay, we already talked about the anti-icing and de-icing. Here are some warning signs that come out of both of these incidents. And, whenever we're flight planning and looking at our route of flight, it's really not too hard. We just have to keep it in mind that whenever there's temperature near the freezing level and moisture, we have to anticipate, even if there's no call out in air mets or wherever, we have to anticipate that there's going to be icing. And if we're not FEACU certified, develop a route where we can avoid the clouds. Looking at how much your forecast icing potential, and at what point would you make the decision not to go? And as I looked through and heard through the Cirrus pilot and some of the conditions that we heard the narrator start to get into before the video quit, it was we had an air met for icing, we had mountain obscuration, and we had turbulence. And you have to ask yourself, you're in an aircraft that this particular Cirrus, some Cirrus are FEACU, but this particular one isn't. You have to ask yourself, man, if I don't say no to this flight, when would I say no? And sometimes I think it helps us to sort of back up and take a look at it from that perspective. The other condition that comes for him is, remember right before the video quit, he said, hey, Senator, what are the bottoms? Are they at 4,000 feet? And Senator says, oh no, they're at 4,000 feet. They're at 400 feet. And in my mind, man, this condition has just drastically changed. In his mind, he probably thought, if this icing gets too bad, I'm just going to drop below it and go VFR. That option just went out the window when ATC gave him an update on what the weather was. Now I think you find yourself sitting in that cockpit, and I do want to caveat here and say we all have the ability to sit here and do this in hindsight. We don't mean to be overly critical of the pilot, but assessing the conditions and the things that went through his mind are what help us maybe prevent that scenario someday. But in this case, that all of my escape options just went out the window. I now have no escape options. The weather's socked in, it's at or right below minimums of the place I want to divert to. It's a time to realize I'm in real trouble. And maybe the question earlier that might should go through your mind in a Cirrus is, I need to be ready to pull the chute if this gets much worse. So let's see, we talked about some of this stuff here. Yeah, so let's move on. So what were some of the options available? And we've hit on some of these. Of course, the option not to fly is always there. And I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit on the next slide on a really interesting book that I'm in the middle of. And the other one is aborting early. And I kind of referenced that when he's talking to center and says, you know, what are the bottoms, 4,000? No, it's 400. And that was the time to abort in my mind. Making that decision to abort can be so impactful, but it's also, I agree, very difficult to make because it feels like mission failure. And somehow we as pilots and in the community and ACON and the other type clubs we're in, we've got to help enforce that mindset that it's not failure to go out and attempt a mission and realize conditions are different than what I thought, the situation's different, and to turn back around and come home or not fly at all. And the other one is the rerouting early. If he'd have diverted early, that might have also helped him, and that was an option. And off-airport landing and declaring an emergency may have helped in this scenario. I just don't know that ATC could have done that much to him or to help him. But I do think it would have helped the scenario if, when he realized he was in trouble, that the bottoms were lower than what he thought. He's picking up icing and he has no way to get rid of the icing because he doesn't have de-ice, for him to declare an emergency and say, get me to the nearest place where I can get VFR and get out of icing. Take me to the closest vector. And ATC is more than willing to help in that. As we've seen time and time again, the controllers want to help us. And oftentimes we as pilots, it's funny the things go through our mind. We think, oh, well, am I going to get in trouble because I'm not PD certified and I flew in icing and maybe I deviated and I did this or that. And I can tell you from talking to controllers, it's the furthest thing from their mind. What they want to do is get you safe, move you on, and then get on to controlling the next people and provide their separation. So I think as pilots, we can leverage that and use that a lot more than what we do.
Richard,
yeah.
we did have one comment that came up and said, at 4 degrees Celsius, would the ice ever melt? And how long should the pilot wait to know that it wouldn't happen?
Yeah, I think that's what's really hard is at 4 degrees Celsius, would the ice ever melt? I think it depends on so many variables. What kind of icing are we talking about? How thick is it? If it's clear ice, which is the most difficult kind, and clear ice actually happens from the water hitting your airplane and then trailing off, and it freezes as it goes along the skin of your airplane. That's what clear ice is. And it can be very thick, can be very hard, and it's more dense, and it can be more difficult to remove. So to answer the question is, it's so dependent on the conditions. What kind of icing is it? How long have you been up there? How cold is the skin of your airplane? What kind of water and moisture are you running into? So all I can tell you is that my observation of flying into icing and both in inadvertently getting into icing and flying with known icing equipment is I'm always amazed at how long it takes to get rid of ice once it accumulates. It's not uncommon for you to have icing descend out of it. And we've seen pictures like this all the time where pilots come in and land and it's below freezing and there's still ice on the airplane when they land. So I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer, but I don't think there is one. I think it's too conditionally dependent.
Well, that makes great sense, Richard. One of our attendees had a comment and said that he had never iced up faster than clipping a cumulus cloud top at 16,000 feet. He was in there for less than 5 seconds and couldn't see out the windshield.
Wow. Yeah.
And just as a follow-up to our earlier question that Jason had put in about disconnecting the autopilot, one of our other members had said you can usually note the trim position of the aircraft. If it's not at the usual position for cruising flight, that would indicate that the autopilot's trimming to compensate for ice. Wondering if that's a logical explanation for that.
Yeah, you know what? That seems like a great cross-check, isn't it? And it's just, you know, as I was looking through this and just preparing to remind myself of some of the things about icing, you just remind yourself that, man, there's just nothing good about icing. It decreases your energy. It adds more drag. It reduces lift. It's heavier. There's just nothing good about it. And here's yet another difficult thing is it runs your trim problematically. So that seems like a really good idea to me, both of them, to first check where your trim indications are. And then if they seem off to you, or if you don't have any indication of it, we heard tonight, every 5 minutes or so, disconnect it and make sure you're okay. When he decides to divert, I think it's Johnstown where he's deciding to go to first, and the controller tells him the minimums there are 200 feet. And he says, okay, I'll go a little bit further east to Altoona, where it's 500 feet. And the question that we were asking ourselves here, our panel of CFIs here in ASI, we were saying, based on the icing, based on his conditions, should he just have accepted Johnstown to get down and fly that approach at 200 feet, right at minimums? Now, in his case, maybe he didn't do that because in the prep sessions he's had flying IFR, he wasn't ready to fly to 200 feet. Maybe he thought, I'm not there yet. That's not my personal minimums. I'm not ready to fly to minimums. We don't know the answer to that, but it is a question worth pondering for all of us. Would that have been a better option? And if you have a comment for that, please make one in the Q&A, and we'll get Keith to share it with us.
We're waiting for comments to come in on that, but we do have another comment that came in that said that this individual's autopilot does not have auto trim, and when it is out of trim, they get a light and an alarm, which, you know, one would assume that repeated alarms would be a clue that something's not right.
Okay. The final point I want to make here as we're gathering comments is the importance of what I call a bailout direction. So whenever I plan a flight and the weather is challenging, I always want to know in which direction the weather is moving, and is it clear on the front side of it or clearer on the back? And it depends. Sometimes after a front comes through, it's amazing how low the IFR can be behind the front. And so your better option is to try to get in front of the front if your speed and your flight path can allow you to do that. In other cases, it's clearer behind the front, so it's better to go on the backside. But in either case, I always want to know if this weather deteriorates and is worse than what I think, which direction am I going to bail out? And the podcast that I mentioned of the Cirrus pilot that's flying up around the Michigan area, that was really important to him. He knew exactly where the weather was coming from. It got worse than what he thought. He picked up some icing, and he knew exactly what his bailout direction was.
I was just going to say, we have one comment that came in that said, a missed approach at 200 feet in ice might be more difficult than going to a 500-foot ceiling airport.
Yeah, so in case he missed 200 feet, he's got icing or he's still in icing, you know, how difficult would that be? Because he can't hold altitude as it is. So yeah, that's a good consideration. So, you know, how does ice, this is kind of the slide that, you know, as we were building it, it just reminded me, man, this is why I'm afraid of ice, you know, because this is nothing good about it. Increases your stall speed, reduces your lift, increases your drag. As we mentioned, the wing will stall en route. The tail will usually stall on approach, which is why you don't want to add flaps, because when you add flaps, you usually have to actually reduce your angle of attack. And sometimes you're unable to do that with icing on the tail, and the tail will stall. And then it can impact your control effectiveness. We all know that it can block your pedostatic system to where now, you know, you've got all those things you're dealing with in terms of more drag, reduced thrust, and, you know, your lift is different, your plane's flying differently. Well, to add to that, you're not going to have, maybe if it ices up, valid airspeed indications. You know, problematic there for sure. So this is what I wanted to share with you about a book I'm in the middle of, and it's pretty fascinating. And for certain, one of the issues in these flights, or maybe both of them, was this planned continuation bias. And planned continuation bias kind of comes from confirmation bias and desirability bias. So enough of these biases, give me a break. It probably should be a drinking game. But, you know, confirmation bias is seeing what we expect to see. And you've all heard about that when you taxi to the wrong runway because ADA said the other runway, you got directions to the other runway, and yet still you started taxiing in the wrong direction because that's just what you're used to hearing. And you kind of heard what you thought you should hear. And then the desirability bias, that really impacts our decision-making because we tend to see what we want to see. And in that case, we tend to overvalue any kind of evidence that supports the decision we want to make, and we undervalue anything that sort of should give us pause to reassess the situation. So, and then, most of us here are saying, well, a lot of people are biased, but I'm not, because I'm a really smart guy. They even have a term for that. That's called the I'm not biased bias. And so the research from this book showed that actually more educated people and people with higher IQs tend to have more problems with this kind of bias than other people do. So it's kind of that quote at the bottom of the book, which kind of synthesizes what the book is about. And that is being good at thinking can actually make you a worse decision maker if you're not careful. We tend to, I'm sorry, Keith, go ahead. Is there a question or comment? Nope.
We didn't have any pop up yet, but I think David's got one for you.
Yeah, Richard, wanted to ask, and I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I'm interested in why the pilot didn't declare an emergency, or why pilots in general are reluctant to declare an emergency.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to, but when you do, doors start to open and things can kind of turn around for you quickly. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, I think you're right, David. What's helpful for us to remember is ATC can declare an emergency for you if they want to. And I think the biggest thing, even we've had this conversation, that even if you're in a scenario where there's nothing they can do for you, in my mind, it still communicates to them that in your mind, you're in real trouble. And even them knowing that, I think is a powerful step, because they can help you in ways that we're not even aware of, by clearing out traffic so you get the nearest runway or whatever runway you want to go to. Mm-hmm. They can keep you on a single frequency approach instead of having to hand you off. They can orchestrate it where they'll keep you on the frequency, so that's one less thing you have to worry about if you're in the weather or task saturated. So yeah, I do think that it would have been a good idea to declare an emergency, and especially the Cirrus pilot seemed to kind of know he was getting in trouble there. It's tough to know from the Bonanza incident what we know there. Did he really realize he was in that much trouble?
Good answer.
Some other things about bias, and if we could sort of change our mindset and think like a scientist when we're planning these, and the way a scientist thinks is they set out a hypothesis based on these facts, then this is likely, the situation, or this will likely be the result, right? That's kind of how a scientist thinks. And we as pilots tend to think based on this set of facts, weather and my training and all the stuff we put into flight planning, this is going to be my result. I'm going to make it. If we sort of step back a little bit and said, based on this set of facts, my hypothesis is I'm going to make it. But if anything in those set of facts changes, I'm going to step back. My hypothesis is no longer valid. I think if we could have that mindset when we start out on many of the missions where the weather is, kind of marginal, or the winds, or whatever the case is, our fuel state, then that might help us think differently about it being a failure if we don't make the mission that we started out for. And just a thought. I'd love to hear any thoughts from other people who might have thoughts on that topic.
We've got a couple that have popped in. One of our local pilots had made the comment that if you declare an emergency, air traffic control will keep other aircraft out of your way. So that is at least one less thing to worry about. And another one here says, I just did scenario-based training with my CFII on a simulator. It was an excellent tool for learning to be objective while you're in the air, dealing with multiple emergencies to find a solution. Also in the military, when we created plans, we built in courses of action that included outliers, so at least we had thought about them. Might be a good way to approach a flight plan.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and then one question. Did the Cirrus pilot have a passenger? And if so, do you think the presence of a passenger could affect the pilot's willingness to declare an emergency or admit the danger he felt?
Yeah, I think it can. I definitely think it can. Any other comments or thoughts from the group? Keith, anything else in the Q&A chat there?
I think we might have a couple more come in, and I'll interrupt you just as they come in, but none on the page at the moment. But again, an outstanding presentation.
Well,
Always
I
learn
want
a
to,
lot more.
yeah, thank you so much. I want to thank all of the people that donate to the foundation. Your membership to AOPA is really important to keep GA thriving. Those who support the foundation, all the stuff that the Air Safety Institute does is funded through the foundation. So thank you for that. Thank you for allowing us to do this kind of work. And I want to thank Dr. Kearney again. It was really his idea. He and I chat frequently about safety. And he said, hey, let's go back to the roots and start looking at some of your accidents in your videos and break those down and have a conversation about them. And we love the format. We've done it elsewhere since we picked this up a year ago in ACON. It's very popular. So all good stuff.
Great job, Richard. We're so fortunate to have your friendship and you working with the Aero Club each and every year. We're really thrilled with the work that you're doing. And a gentle reminder that the Aero Club of New England works not just tonight but year round, always throughout the year to promote general aviation and aviation safety with events just like this, along with seminars and workshops. We present a number of scholarships each and every year, as well as to young and new pilots, as well as more seasoned and mature aviators that we're quite proud of. We also host a number of social events, flyouts, that kind of things, luncheons, great opportunities for people who just love flying just like you. So we hope you become a member if you're not already a member of the Aero Club of New England. We're offering a virtual membership tonight for just $25. I think we'll put a link in the chat, in the Q&A, I should say, or just go to acone.org to find out just a little bit more. A big thank you to all of our panelists tonight: Richard McSpadden from the Air Safety Institute, Administrator Colleen D'Alessandro, and Stephen K. Brown from the FAA's FAAST team. Also, big thanks to Paul Diet from all the way from London, where it's 1 o'clock or so in the morning, give or take. Keith Lenhart, who's been doing the switching, Dr. Kearney, and our co-presidents of the Aero Club, Dan Schrager and Georgia Pappas. Thank you all for attending, and appreciate you being with us tonight. And thanks again, as always, for your support of the Aero Club of New England. Thank you all, and good night.